life as you know it for the unknown. And those that have accepted that adventure, I don't know if it's worked out so great. I mean, I can't think of too many guys that have come up in the modern era that have really clicked. And that's not their fault necessarily. It's not the office's fault. Just they haven't clicked. Look at Sin Cara / Mystico. Just the training issues or the injury issues, I should say. But will Rush and La Máscara end up in WWE? I guess we'll see. But that'd be a huge get for WWE. Very talented guys.
Now this past week, Paige had her neck surgery. It's a very busy week for Paige. Not only getting engaged to Alberto Del Rio, Alberto El Patron, Alberto El Presidente.
Alberto, future husband. I don't know how to say that in Spanish, sorry.
Yes. So she had her neck surgery. Said it went well. The hernia was bigger than expected and my neck was straightened. Now this girl has 3 screws in her neck. Pictures to come. And then, listen to this. From Thursday, Tampa Airport. I just had neck surgery. I can't raise my hands about my head for screening. Don't cuss me out. I will still kick your ass.
Was this directed at anyone in particular or just you?
She said Tampa Airport.
So this is directed at them. Yeah.
This is the best reality show that is not being filmed. The Paige and Alberto Del Rio.
It is. It would be. I think this is. I mean, it's pretty well documented on Twitter. I understand that Natalia visited her in the hospital, and Nikki also shouted her out on Twitter. But neck surgery wouldn't be flying right after that. But that's just me. Maybe I'm a pussy. Maybe it's just what you do after neck surgery. The next day is fly out. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I guess she's going to be on the shelf for till the spring, I'd imagine. Sometimes it's up to a year. So Paige in her return to the ring is the WWE ring. I guess we'll see. Typically, WWE's not going to, if they had an issue with someone or the talent issue, then they're not going to come to some sort of resolution to move on until that person's healed from the injury, just for many reasons. Some of them PR, some of them otherwise. But so her status is probably going to stay as is for the foreseeable future. I am not speaking as an expert on this, just, I guess I am, but I don't have intel from her or WWE that that's what they're doing, but just based on history. I would imagine that's where they go with it. But maybe there'll be a wedding. Maybe there'll be a wedding this time. Who knows?
Oh, man, E's going to be furious.
Yeah, I'm trying to get MSL to be the ring bearer. We'll see what happens.
Oh, boy. What could go wrong?
Make it a podcast, of course.
Since we were not here last week, I did want to just bring up this topic about this network survey that the WWE put out, and not going through all the different tiers, but the 4th tier that they're talking about, this $14.99 option, and these are all kind of theoretical questions being thrown out. They haven't committed to anything here change-wise. But the idea of having outside companies available on the network, we certainly have spoken about this quite a lot, and reflecting the Fight Pass presentation. But the WWE Network, it's been very much inclusive of their own content and what they own. And this is the first sign of them looking outside, whether it be outright trying to buy content outside and then just bring it in, or lease content, which would be interesting. Do you see this as viable and realistic on the WWE's part to go out there? I mean, they specifically listed TNA and Ring of Honor in the survey. Logistically and contractually, that might be easier said than done.
Yeah, it depends on how they go about doing this, if they do it at all. And there's another company out there looking to get the exclusive streaming rights to independent companies now too. WWE will surely if they want, they can outbid anyone if they want. It's part of their strategy and what makes sense. The other company is Flow Sports, I think is the name. And so I know some companies are in the process of negotiating an agreement with Flow. I don't know where that will end up. And I really don't know what the viability of streaming this if you're not WWE is. I mean, what can you really do in terms of business? I mean, and streaming is unless you have that stable platform, the infrastructure for that and everything, it's so hard to be foolproof. And if you're WWE, I think it works better. For some of these indie companies, I guess it depends on the money and the terms and the rights involved. I mean, there's a lot of weirdness here, but for WWE, it makes a lot of sense to get the footage from the guys on the ground level if they have the rights to footage for a period of time or in perpetuity. I'm curious to see what fans how many fans would really want this stuff. I think PWG would be an interesting one.
I think PWG is just they have their model and it works for them.
They're being pursued, from what I was told, by one of those companies. I'm not going to say which one.
The question will be how many zeros it will take for PWG to say, you know what, it's been fun doing this, but this is outrageous money.
Yeah.
I mean, they are the only company I think I buy DVDs from in this day and age. I just got the Battle of Los Angeles yesterday, so that's my weekend viewing, Court. You're welcome to come over.
All right, I'll hop on the plane and be there by tonight. Maybe go to that place. What was it called? Swanky Frank's? What's the place where we went with Damien?
Swanky Frank's?
That might be in Stanford, I'm sorry.
Sneaky D's?
Yes. He's not that far off.
Swanky Frank's. That's the one where, was it you that got, you got sick.
Yes, I'm still going away for that, but that's it.
I've never got sick at Sneaky D's. It's a monument here in Toronto. It should be a what's it called? A historical venue.
That sounds classy.
There's nothing classy about Sneaky D's.
No, other than the honor you just bestowed upon it. But NXT's coming to Toronto, and
dude, everything is coming to Toronto.
Jim Ross, everything's converging within the next month. Are you gonna be ready for this?
Nope, I'm not. I am just gonna give up on this weekend because in addition to all the wrestling insanity, there are 2 UFCs and a Bellator on that Saturday, which I do have to see at some point on that weekend, and I don't know when that is exactly going to happen. But I actually just got this on Thursday night. Chris Jericho is doing his Talk is Jericho show on the Sunday morning, and I don't believe his show overlaps with Jim Ross's. So if you are really in the mood to hear a lot of Q&As and attend all of these, you could go to Chris Jericho's show with AJ Styles Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and then it's a quick walk to Second City to catch Jim Ross. And there's also an NXT after party, I understand, on Saturday night at the Real Sports Bar right next to the Air Canada Centre with Christian and The Miz. This is going to be a wild weekend, Court, and you're going to miss it.
Well, I'm sure you'll be taking in as much as you can. How much of that do you plan to experience?
Well, I'm hosting the Jim Ross show, so I expect to experience that. I will not be going to Survivor Series. I may be going to TakeOver. I don't know. There's a lot of... I don't know how I'm planning.
Fair,
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, you're... I mean, I think you should do a live remote from the parking lot. Old school style like they do.
Do you know how cold it's going to be in 4 weeks' time?
Listen,
here in Canada?
I'm not moving to Canada, but you don't want to, for all my fellow Americans looking at Canada, you're just telling how nice it is. Don't freak them out.
I'll sound like a total snob here, but it was really something over WrestleMania weekend where, this was the first year I didn't go to WrestleMania in like 4 years, and I got to cover so much more just being at home, and it was largely enjoyable, save for a stream here and there, but it was like I could do so much more just being at home, and I kind of like just watching events. It's the same with MMA. Whenever I'm at a card, I'm just watching it in the back. I don't find watching it live really does much more for me. In fact, it's more difficult to kind of cover.
Has your road to WrestleMania 33 in Orlando been officially derailed?
No, it is not. It's still a 50-50. I would like to get to Orlando. It is possible.
House of Mouse.
We shall see.
We'll see. Well, the Toronto card's a good one. When you look at the NXT show, you got Samoa Joe with Nakamura there for the NXT title. Mickie James challenging for the women's title. That's going to be a big one.
Bobby Roode and Ty Dillinger. That crowd's going to be super hot for those two.
And then you got the finals of the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, if you will. So that's right now what the card is, and as we get closer, we'll probably have more. But it's an interesting time. You look at Toronto. You guys are the hotbed for wrestling. You got Goldberg and Brock. It's going down. So
what do you think the reaction is going to be like to Goldberg in Toronto?
I think they're gonna like him. And people have been saying,
I do too.
oh, he took out Bret Hart. Dude, come on, it was an accident. It was. There people. You know what though? You got 4 weeks. Things can cool off very quickly depending on how WWE goes with stuff creatively. Market to market, crowds can be hot, can be cold. But I think they're going to be big into that match. Now, once the bell rings, all bets are off for how the crowd reacts to that match. You know, going in, he comes out, the music, they're going to pop. When that bell rings, all bets are off. You never know.
Promotionally, I am not in favor of this, but from the standpoint that this guy has not had a match since 2004, he's 49. Would you push for Goldberg to do a match before Survivor Series? And I don't even know, I mean, you would essentially have to do it on TV, and I wouldn't want him to have a long match, which would kind of be the point of doing a match, just to get some. I mean, he can do all the training he wants and all the practices he wants. It is very different when you're actually in there doing a match. I could see them hot-shotting something on that Halloween night with Goldberg.
I prefer not only he not wrestle until Survivor Series, but they don't get heat. They keep them separate. I don't want to see them touch.
Well, of course, from a promotion,
of course, because you know that this shit can go about 10 different ways.
I'm saying, like, in a perfect world, yes, he should not. The match should be Survivor Series, but he also has to go out there at Survivor Series and not just do a 2-minute match. And do you want to at least have this guy go out there and at least have a match for the first time in 14 years and see how his cardio is and how he's going to hold up here? I mean, that's a hard 12, 13-minute match with Brock Lesnar.
I would put him on select house shows if you want to, and check that out if you want to go down that road. I wouldn't.
Maybe he'll go down to the Performance Center and have the greatest practice match with Shawn Michaels that no one will see, that they'll put on a future DVD release.
I like the idea of WWE Performance Center doing smokers. Just these matches no one sees. Just have like WrestleMania matches that are smokers.
That could be content.
Yeah.
Just flying guys do like Ricky Morton, Shawn Michaels, 10 minutes at the Performance Center.
Flair, Shawn Michaels again. You know, just book Brock Lesnar, have him go down there. Shawn versus Brock. It's endless. You could bring down Cornette and do Heyman versus Cornette. It's endless. But you know, we'll see what happens with Goldberg. I think don't have him touch. Don't do any of that stuff, and I wouldn't do a long match. 12
I do not like this idea of him coming on that Halloween night show. I don't know what you could possibly do to top this past Monday. I thought that segment was amazing. I understand doing the face-to-face with Brock on the go-home show, but what more can you do, save for a match on the 31st?
Yeah, but it's Halloween. I don't know how.
What's he going to come out? Do another promo? What accomplished? There's no Brock there that night.
I get very worried about Goldberg on Halloween being
oh geez,
someone putting like a Hillary Clinton wig on him or something, like, you know, Goldust put
an imminent wig with Paul Heyman dressed as Dracula.
I think Paul Lee could do a really compelling Alfred Hitchcock action, but that's a story for another time. Before we shut the show down, World of Sport is returning later this year for a 2-hour special on ITV, hosted by.
You want to go?
I'm down, man. Let's do it. It's going down on November 1st in Manchester. It's going to be hosted by the legendary American announcer, Jumpin' Jim Ross. It's cool to see World of Sport returning. People have been watching all their videos for forever on YouTube. And it seems like this is kind of like the natural progression of all of the enthusiasm for British wrestling over the last few years, culminating in maybe a one night only. The one night only sometimes turns into something else. But World of Sport returning on ITV this year. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if ever there was a time to push forward wrestling on ITV, now's the time. I mean, that part of the world is just
ready for it.
So hot with talent.
They're ready for it.
There's so much, and now they've got the attention of so many people worldwide. It would be great if they could get television there and also be able to get it into other countries as well. I think that you have so many great promotions there, and it's just getting attention on your products. And going back to our network discussion, I mean, that's why I would love the idea of one outlet being able to get all these different companies under one umbrella. I'm I'm not down with just having to subscribe to 20 different streaming services. I think for convenience-wise, I think the future is one or two big ones, and you get your progresses and your Rev Pros and everything, and you pay your $20 a month.
Well, it's like anything. These are tech companies, and what could happen, I'm not saying it will happen, is smaller tech companies get gobbled up by the bigger ones. And that may happen with this one day, or not. But everyone's in a race to accumulate content and exclusivity on that content. And it's great for, at least right now, you look at the British wrestling scene, they have your own product that appeals to the local level. Is something that I think is going to be very interesting for ITV and anyone else out that's looking to make a play on non-WWE product. And with the TNA's, I think TNA's deal is coming up soon with, was it Challenge TV?
Challenge.
So if that's the case, that's an interesting opportunity, because when TNA would go through the market, they would do huge business always out there. So that maybe is an opportunity to take a company like RevPro, like Progress, et cetera, and go and to the next level. We'll see what happens there, but it's cool to see Jim Ross involved as an announcer, going back and hosting this. So across the other end of the world, we also wonder where in the world is Matt Seidel after what came out in Econ Sports earlier this week. A lot of speculation had been brewing about what had happened, and the tweets about him in Hawaii due to passport issues now, obviously a cover-up. But tragically, because of some bad decision making, and people are going to say, "Hey, she should be allowed to do this." You know, it's a harmless drug. But bottom line is, the rules in Japan are the rules in Japan. You have to abide by the rules of Japan, or you're shit out of luck and you're going to get into a problem like this. You just got to respect the rules, know the rules. And it's happened to celebrities that have entered Japan. It's happened to other wrestlers that have entered Japan. And in those times, promoters would help facilitate a solution with money sometimes that these issues would go away. That didn't happen with Matt Seidel. So it looks like he's going to lose his future New Japan bookings because he can't enter the country. And I'm sure New Japan's probably not too enamored with this, but they've replaced him with Finlay, and Ricochet and Finlay's an interesting combo.
Yeah, David Finlay, I'm very high on David Finlay. It's very unfortunate with Matt Seidel, a super talented guy who now has, theoretically lost the ability to make a living in Japan, which there were options for him. I mean, whether it was in Dragon Gate and more recently New Japan, that's a sizable hit to your possible outlets to make money in. But as you said, Court, everybody knows what the rules are, and it's similar when there's a drug test in MMA, specifically for pot, and you'll hear all the outrage, and my stance has always been, the time to argue that is before you break the rule, not afterwards. We know what the rules are in place, and to just ignore it, that's not going to get you out of the issue. And in Japan, it's the worst place possible to be carrying marijuana. As Seidel was one.
Yeah, so, what's his future? Who's to say? And also another person I'm wondering about their future is George St. Pierre. Terminates his UFC agreement. What the hell is going on?
Well, Court, you have dealt with many contracts in your day. You can't just say, I'm no longer under contract to my promotion. But it's an interesting case.
You can opt out. You do have provisions where you can opt out. Every contract's different. They're totally different. So I can't speak, about GSP's contract, but I don't know why. Well, here's terminated.
Well, George St. Pierre's last contract he signed was in 2011, so that predated the Reebok provisions in the new contracts, and he makes a ton of money in endorsement deals. So if he truly wants to fight this, which the UFC came out with a statement disagreeing with George St. Pierre's classification as a free agent, it's an interesting discussion if you go in front of a judge stating, A, this is the contract I signed, and I'm no longer allowed outside endorsements, and I'm labeled as an independent contractor that is now being told I have to wear this exclusive apparel company while giving up money that my signed contract allows me. I don't know how a judge interprets that. I don't know if George necessarily is going to go to those lengths, or if this is simply the latest tactic in this negotiating term with himself in the UFC, because George St. Pierre becoming a free agent it doesn't mean he's going to be able to make this money in Bellator. It's probably a pipe dream that he can earn the same level of money outside of the UFC. I would say it's near impossible. I think that if he wants to fight, it probably should be in the UFC, and he probably knows that.
Well, it's a new era for the UFC. A lot of things are changing, and they're looking to pump up their profitability and shave back all spending. And
massive cuts this week.
Massive cuts, heartbreaking cuts.
Yeah, this was at the highest level of their executive ranks. I mean, Gary Cook, he was out this week. Marshall Zelaznik, who's been with that company for a decade. Tom Wright, who oversaw the Canadian office as well as Australia and New Zealand. We know Dave Schaller, he had taken a job last week with the Philadelphia 76ers. He's finishing up soon. Joe Silva will be leaving the company by the end of the year. I mean, this is going to be a drastically different UFC come 2017.
Yeah, and
we mentioned culture changes. That, to me, is the epitome of it in the UFC at the moment.
And behind it all, this was a leverage buyout. Essentially, they borrowed money to buy UFC. So now the rush is on them to drive up profitability and cut to the bone on operations. This is done every day in these kind of deals. So you're going to see a lot more heartbreak and a lot more cutting back, and hopefully the UFC can operate at a level that allows them to continue to grow. That's what their intent is, to drive up profitability, but keep this thing as lean as possible. And then, the exit strategy for William Morris Endeavor, Ari Emanuel, is sometimes to go public, sometimes to sell to another party. But those are kind of the exit strategies you look at when you have something like this, and there's others. But George St. Pierre can generate a shit ton of money, especially up in your neck of the woods, but anywhere really. And to have him come back into the family only is to their advantage. Will it happen? Time is clicking on both UFC and for... I shouldn't say time is clicking, time is ticking on UFC and for Georges St. Pierre, because, the older you get, the harder it is to come back and be effective, but also the longer you're away from the fans. And I'm not saying they're going to forget a Georges St. Pierre. He's really a once-in-a-lifetime type fighter, but it's everything's going against you. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully they can bring him back. If they were to somehow resolve this, what's the fight you put in there?
Georges St. Pierre, I think the comeback of Georges St. Pierre, I don't want to say the opponent it doesn't matter. You certainly want someone, Robbie Lawler was a name floated out, and he has since stated that he would be willing to fight. That would be a very interesting fight for George coming back. It would be a very difficult fight for George coming back. I think there's a lot of interest in that. I think you could have gone with a Nick Diaz. I think that's a fight Diaz would have wanted, and I know some people would not necessarily be crazy about that rematch, but I think that would be a really big fight this many years later. You're talking 3.5 years since they last fought. Those would be options to me that I would be looking at. And I think it would be a massive success, but you're coming at a time when they are cutting costs and fighters are demanding more and more, and you pay George what he wants, and suddenly that raises the ceiling of so many other of your top draws that believe that they bring even more to the table than George does, and that it comes at a very difficult time when you're trying to drastically cut costs and meet these earnings that you have promised with all this debt that the new company has taken on.
Yeah, it's and how much does a company like this appreciate Georges St. Pierre? Now, Dana White, of course, is going to give them the perspective of what this means, but they've trimmed out a lot, and they're moving a lot of their operations, their business, a lot of key roles to Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. And with William Morris Endeavor handling a lot of these aspects, the appreciation for what a certain fighter means might be lost on some.
And don't forget, Georges St. Pierre is repped by CAA.
Dun dun dun.
What an interesting storyline.
Good for Georges St. Pierre, because there's a lot of conflict of interest, and everyone can say, "Oh, we're in different departments and stuff. It's fine. Don't worry about it." Yeah, that's not going to work out so well for most.
All right. Well, that is going to wind things down. All a riveting edition of Bauer and Pollock, brought to you by Google Docs.
Well, actually, I did add one last thing to our Google Docs I think it's important we touch on before we head out.
Yes.
Jordan Parsons, Axel Rotten, and Balls Mahoney diagnosed with CTE. Former Bellator fighter Jordan Parsons, and of course, everyone's familiar probably with Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney, both recently, all three recently passed away. And they released information that that Parsons is the first MMA fighter to be diagnosed with CTE.
Yes, and the fact he was so young, that's definitely concerning.
24, 25, I think.
25 years old, yeah, when he died just tragically earlier this year in a hit-and-run accident, and trained with the Black Zillions out of Florida. And I mean, that's a gym that houses the likes of Anthony Johnson, Rashad Evans, tons of guys. So the fact that this was such a young fighter, I'm sure that would concern any fighter. The fact that this is one of those things where I'm sure deep down you realize is possible in your future, but seeing actual evidence of it in such a young fighter who hadn't had a ton of professional fights, you can't help but be concerned for other fighters who have done so much more, not just fight-wise, but sparring and how hard they have gone in training. And I mean, this is probably going to be a story that does not let up for an entire generation to come as more and more brains are being examined.
Yeah, and Dr. Julia Koffler at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center also diagnosed Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney, along with, in conjunction with Dr. Bennett Omalu, who many are familiar with, very high-profile guy who was the subject of the movie Concussion. He also confirmed the same results. So this is going to be interesting, as there's a class action lawsuit against WWE regarding concussions with Konstantin Kairos, I'm assuming a Greek gentleman, representing this class action lawsuit against WWE. So where this ends, I don't know, but it's a reminder. Full contact sport, as MMA, as football, even pro wrestling. Of course, it's all work. But when you get dropped on your head, you get dropped on your head. When you take a back bump and you land the wrong way, it's impacting your brain. Every back can impact your brain. Your brain is taken wrong. So it's a troubling thing, but it's probably there's more on the way. And in the case of New York State now, they have new legislation. I think it's on the books or about to be on the books, where you have to put in, if you're a promoter for boxing, for MMA, I don't think it extends to pro wrestling. Maybe it will one day, but you have to put out a lot of insurance money for each show to insure the fighters for 5 to 7 years for the purpose of CTE. So changing times, changing business issues for these companies.
The final thing, are you able to share your Donald Trump story?
I have a Donald Trump
about your email, or is that a private story?
I mean, I was hit up by the AP if I had any Donald Trump stories, and if so, please to contact them as soon as possible. I can confirm.
I thought that was the greatest story, that they tracked you down for any possible damning evidence of this kid.
Yeah, I can confirm that he did not try to grab my pussy, because I don't have one, but he never made any advances towards me, nor did I see him make any advances towards anyone. I had my experiences were relatively innocuous with Mr. Trump, so sorry, but I wrote back to AP saying thanks for thinking of me, but yeah, I don't have anything. And even if I did, and I don't, it's like, man, imagine opening up Pandora's box if you did that.
Someone's listening right now.
I don't have a damn thing. Sorry, I have zero.
Well, you go high, Court.
All I want is just to kick back and have a nice meal, Swanky Franks. I don't need all this political shit.
Yes. It will be quite something in 6 months from now when nobody has any care in the world about who the president is.
But I will tell you, there's a good chance that the Donald will be a part of WWE 27. If I was a betting man and I don't have any knowledge, I'd say, oh, that $6 million that Linda spent on his campaign was a gesture. At this point in time, to drop $6 million large, that's a gesture. Say, hey, when times are tough, remember, we got your back.
What if he doesn't do a concession speech on election night?
Does it on Raw.
And does it on Raw. And he just buries Hillary in the political process and the Republican Party. Scorched earth on the USA Network, no
I'm
less.
sure in the back of Vince's mind, he's thinking, how do I make him president of something just on TV? I'm sure Vince is thinking that. I'm sure Vince is thinking, how does he... Vince right now is thinking, if this guy doesn't win, how do I monetize this? Because that's what makes Vince Vince, you know? And that's why he has the resources and the connections to make that happen. To again, give a friendly... some people say, my thoughts are with you, they'll send a card or an email or text. Dropping $6 million is another gesture, but of the similar vein. Just, of the 1% version.
Well, things to look forward to in the world of wrestling.
Not in Canada, you don't have to worry about any of this.
No, we're good. We're fine with our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Court, what is going on in MLW
I just
land?
want to point out, we did once elect a Saint Laurent, so I just want to point that out.
That is true.
We did have some,
Named the street after him, too, in Montreal.
hopefully there'll be a Mr. Saint Laurent Street one day, but we'll see what happens.
Maybe he'll run one day.
I just want him to run somewhere. Just to get this guy in shape. As for MLW Radio, MLWRadio.com, we have right now a new show coming out later today with Bruce Pritchard, talking about his time in TNA, which is very timely given the craziness going on there. We have a new Ric Flair show out with Shane Helms. We have a new MLW Radio out. We have an MLW History in the Making with historian Matt Farmer looking at Memphis wrestling, going back to the Andy Kaufman days with Jerry Lawler, the USWA days, and Mr. McMahon's dry run when he invaded along with Pat Patterson the USWA Memphis in 1992. It's a great history in the making. You don't want to miss it. And we have a ton more. Just go to MLWRadio.com. Never stop pumping out podcasts just like you guys over at The Law.
Yes, and up at liveaudiowrestling.com, we have many new shows up, including a review of Raw and SmackDown and NXT from this past week. And Sunday night on The Law, midnight Eastern time, we are going to be joined by Eric Bischoff, a man that Court Bauer got to know this past week, as well as Dave Meltzer. We'll be chatting all of the news, the latest on TNA, and Bill Goldberg, and whatever else happens between now and Sunday night. And you can, of course, subscribe to Live Audio Wrestling on iTunes, youtube.com/liveaudiowrestling. Court is at Court Bauer. If you are looking for any Donald Trump footage, he can be contacted there. And I am at I am John Pollock.
Knockouts to tap-outs. Inside the octagon and beyond.
Is this not real now? Are we pretending? One week, baby. Break out the red panties.
This is the MMA Report with John Pollock on TSN Radio.
Here we go.
Welcome to the MMA Report. I'm your host, John Pollock, and we'll be here with you for the next hour on TSN Radio. We have lots to discuss on this week's show. It was a pretty impactful week in the UFC. We are going to be going through all of the news that has broken over the last number of days regarding the massive layoffs by Zuffa, and this was worldwide, across the board, with some major heavyweight executives now on the outside of the promotion. This all coming in the wake of this past summer's massive $4 billion sale to WME IMG. We're going to get into the details of that. We're going to chat about George St. Pierre, who had a very noteworthy week and an appearance on the MMA Hour that has sparked a lot of debate and a response from the UFC. We've got fight announcements to discuss, and on this show we are going to be joined by UFC Light Heavyweight Champion Daniel Cormier, who in the midst of all of this news this past week, he was up here in Toronto for a promotional tour for UFC 206 going down December the 10th in Toronto against Anthony Johnson in their rematch for the 205-pound championship. We are also going to have some comments later on, and this is a perfect segue. On Tuesday, I interviewed Tom Wright in what ended up being one of the final interviews that Tom Wright ever conducted as an executive for the UFC and running the Canadian office, and also a general manager for the operations in Australia and New Zealand. It is an interesting discussion to look at in hindsight, and is a reason that we're going to play a portion of that because he was certainly front and center in the news this week. So let's get into the cuts. It had been speculated upon for a long time, ever since the sale, that there were going to be massive changes coming, and who was going to be affected. Would this be across the board? How high would this go? You know this from watching any kind of sale of this magnitude, and this one gigantic, with WME IMG purchasing the company from the Fertitta brothers to the tune of $4 billion. Now, it's important to break this down, and Bloomberg had an excellent breakdown of this last week in terms of the debt that they have taken on in the wake of this sale. Because WME, IMG, they were able to raise $2.6 billion, and that was through Silver Lake Partners, KKR&C, and Dell Incorporated. On top of that, they had to cover the existing debt of $425 million from the previous regime. So you do the math there, they still needed $1.4 billion in additional funding to get to that $4 billion figure. So what it led to was taking on a ton of debt. And at first, the debt was given an interest of 8.5%, and because of there being such a high demand for investors to come on, that debt was eventually lowered, but the debt was sold on a prediction that under this new ownership, annual earnings, EBITDA, would be $298 million. To put that into perspective, for the last fiscal year, from June 2015 to 2016, their earnings were $142 million. So to meet these expectations, they have to more than double. And it is going to take $137 million each year just to pay the interest on this debt. Now, if all these numbers are just spinning in your head, the end result here is that there was going to be a lot of cost cutting, and that reality occurred this past week with a lot of big salaries being taken off of the books. Probably a lot of severance packages, I would speculate, were a part of a lot of these executives exiting the company. The key names that were let go this past week were Gary Cook, who is the Chief Global Brand Officer and the Head of International Development. He was a major executive who came in a number of years ago over in the UK office and was very, very high on the pecking order. Tom Wright, who I mentioned, the Executive Vice President and General Manager of Operations in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, the timing of which was curious, given that that office that oversees both Australia and Canada have two big events coming up at the end of November with their return to Melbourne with the Fight Night card, and then 206 back here in Toronto just a few weeks later. So I looked at this from the side of, these cuts you have to imagine would probably hit all their offices. I thought the Canadian office would likely get a stay until at least January when these events are passed. But that wasn't the case. The Canadian office got hit massively this past week. 80% of their office was laid off. Half of the Asian office was also let go. That was from Ariel Helwani's report. And in total, the term used, MMA Junkie reported it would be less than 15%, but you're looking at 60 to 80 people that are likely gone as a result of this past week's cuts. And this was a major blow because the UFC, since the explosion in 2005, it's been growth. That's what this company has been sold on. It's growth. Every year we are doing more shows. We are getting bigger. We are striving for more. New markets to conquer. The globalization. The fastest growing sport in the world is the tagline we would always hear. We haven't seen this kind of a period where it's a massive, at least the perception of a big step backward. And it comes at a time when this is not a company in decline. This is not a company whose profits have dwindled or pay-per-view has died. It's the exact opposite. By the end of this year, this could be the UFC's best year on pay-per-view when you take into account 205 and 207 still to come this year. It's going to be a gigantic year on pay-per-view for the company. Look at Conor McGregor alone, who has done 2 cards that have generated 1.6 million buys between 196 and 202, and will probably top that with Eddie Alvarez. All told this year, Conor McGregor is likely to generate in the neighborhood of $150 million just for the UFC. That's an incredible number. And what ties into everything here is, as you see the cost cutting that is going on here, the cost cutting is one. The second is in 2 years from now when the Fox deal is up, the idea that they are going to get an enormous increase in their rights fees that could make $298 million a year in earnings possible. But that's 2 years away. So it's dramatically reducing costs, and you had to imagine that WME IMG would be putting their own people into those positions. And when you look at the culture change of the UFC by the time this year ends, a promotion that not only has been sold, but Lorenzo Fertitta gone, Joe Silva gone, Dave Schaller gone, Tom Wright gone, Gary Cook gone. These are big names. Marshall Zelaznik was another one let go this week, the chief content officer who's been with that company for a decade. Very instrumental in their growth internationally with the launch of Fight Pass. Other names were Ken Berger, who is the head of the Asian office, Jamie Pollack, who is the senior vice president of global content, Shonda Maloney, who is the head of social media, Brad Smuckler, Ed Muncie, other names that are out there. These were key positions that were vacated earlier this week. And who is going to be filling these holes? It's going to be a lot of questions coming out of this transitional period now for WME, IMG, and the experience, the product knowledge that was